Imagine this. You walk into your office on a Tuesday morning. Coffee in hand. Laptop bag on your shoulder. Just like any other day. And then your boss calls you into the conference room. The HR manager is already sitting there. There's a folder on the table. Nobody is smiling. And in less than 60 seconds, 7 years of your life are over. We're letting you go, Ethan. That happened to me. I was 32 years old. I had given that company everything I had. My weekends. My holidays. My health. My loyalty. And they handed me a termination letter like I was nobody. Music swells slightly. But here's what they didn't know. They didn't fire me. They freed me. Because 3 years later, I walked back into that same building. Not as an employee. As the owner. My name is Ethan Cole. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My dad ran a hardware store. My mom was a school teacher. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. We were the kind of family where every dollar had a purpose. I remember watching my father lock up the store every night. Tired eyes. Calloused hands. But always a quiet dignity about him. He used to say, "Son, nobody ever built anything great by waiting for permission." I carried those words with me. I was the first in my family to go to college. Studied business. Graduated top of my class. Got my MBA at 26. And then I landed what I thought was my dream job. Sterling and Voss Real Estate Group. One of the most respected commercial real estate firms on the East Coast. I remember the day I got the offer letter. I called my dad. He cried. I thought, this is it. This is where everything begins. And in many ways, it was. Just not the way I expected. My first 2 years at Sterling and Voss were incredible. I was hungry. I came in early. I stayed late. I studied every deal, every client, every market trend. My boss was a man named Richard Voss. The son of one of the founders. Sharp dresser. Sharp talker. Even sharper ego. He was the kind of man who commanded a room the moment he walked in. And I admired him genuinely, I did. He became my mentor. Or so I believed. By year 3, I was closing deals on my own. By year 5, I was managing a team of 12. By year 7, I was responsible for 40% of the firm's annual revenue. 40%. And what was I getting paid? A salary that hadn't moved in 2 years. And a pat on the back at the Christmas party. Pause. I should have seen the signs. But ambition has a way of making you blind to things you don't want to see. In my 7th year, I landed the biggest deal of my career. A commercial development project worth $47 million. I spent 8 months building that relationship. 8 months of calls, meetings, proposals, revisions. The day the contract was signed, Richard Voss shook my hand. He smiled and said, "Good work, Cole." 2 weeks later he presented that deal to the board. Without mentioning my name once. Pause. I went to him privately. I asked him respectfully to acknowledge my contribution. I told him I deserved a promotion and a raise. He looked at me across his desk and said, "Ethan, you work for this company. Not the other way around." I walked out of his office shaking. Not from fear. From the cold, quiet realization that I had been used. Music drops low. 1 week later I was called into HR. The termination letter was already printed. Effective immediately. No severance. Just a non-compete clause and a handshake. I drove home in silence. Sat in my driveway for 45 minutes. Couldn't move. 7 years. 7 years. Gone. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. I had a mortgage. Car payments. A daughter who was 4 years old. I sent out over 150 resumes. I got maybe 12 callbacks. And 0 offers. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. When you're fired in a competitive industry, word travels fast. People I thought were friends stopped returning my calls. Colleagues I had mentored pretended they didn't know me. There were nights I couldn't sleep. 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. Running the numbers over and over again. Wondering how long we could survive on savings. My wife Sarah never once made me feel worse about it. She just said, "Figure out what you're supposed to do next. Not what someone else told you to do." That sentence hit me differently at 3 a.m. I got up. Opened my laptop. And I started writing. Undertones. I wrote down everything I knew about real estate. Every frustration clients had shared with me. Every gap in the market I had noticed. Every deal that fell apart because of poor communication. Every opportunity that was left on the table. And one thing kept coming up over and over again. Transparency. Clients didn't trust brokers. They felt like they were being sold to, not advised. They wanted someone in their corner, not someone working against them. I had 22,000 in savings. No investors. No partners. No office. But I had 7 years of relationships. 7 years of knowledge. And absolutely nothing left to lose. I registered a company. I called it True North Real Estate Advisors. My office was my dining room table. My assistant was my phone. My marketing budget was 0. But my philosophy was simple. Tell the truth. Do the work. The clients will come. My first client was a former contact from Sterling and Voss. A developer who had always liked working with me personally. He gave me a small consulting contract. 8,000. I remember depositing that check. Standing at the ATM crying like an idiot. But it wasn't about the money. It was proof that this could work. That one client turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. 10 turned into 20. I wasn't the biggest firm in the market. I wasn't even close. But I was the most trusted. Every client I worked with I treated like a partner. I returned every call within 2 hours. I told people when a deal wasn't right for them, even if it cost me commission. And in this industry where honesty is rare, that reputation spread like wildfire. By month 9, I had hired 2 people. By month 18, we had a real office, a small one, but ours. By year 2, True North had closed over $80 million in transactions. $80 million. From a dining room table. I won't lie to you, it wasn't all smooth. There were bad months. Deals that fell through. Employees who quit at the worst possible times. Clients who walked away. But every time something went wrong. I remembered that parking lot at Sterling and Voss. And I got back up. 3 years after I was fired. I got a phone call. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Ethan, it's Richard." I said nothing. He continued. "I know things ended badly between us. And I'm not calling to rehash that. Sterling and Voss is in trouble. We're looking at potential buyers. I thought of you. I sat back in my chair. This man who had taken credit for my work, who had fired me without warning, who had handed me a non-compete and shown me the door, was now calling me, asking for my help. Music, slow tension. I took a breath. And I said, send me the financials. I'll have my team take a look. The due diligence took 6 weeks. Sterling and Voss was bleeding. Bad investments. Lawsuits from 2 former clients. Key employees had already left. The firm that had once made me feel worthless was worth far less than it used to be. My team valued the acquisition at $4.1 million. We made an offer. $3.6 million. Richard Voss accepted. Pause 3 seconds. On the day the papers were signed, I walked into that building, past the front desk where I used to say good morning to Donna every day, past the conference room where I was terminated, and I sat down in Richard Voss's chair. Music, triumphant swell. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't gloat. I just sat there quietly and I called my dad. I said, Dad, I did it. He said, I know, son. I always knew. And I cried. For the second time in 3 years. But this time very, very different tears. Music, soft, warm, inspirational close. True North Real Estate Advisors, including the acquired assets of Sterling and Voss, now employs 61 people. But the numbers aren't the point. The point is what I learned along the way. And I want to leave you with this. Lesson 1, the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor. They push you towards something they never imagined you could become. Lesson 2, your reputation is your most valuable asset. Protect it. Build it with honesty. It will outlast any deal, any company, any setback. Lesson 3, don't confuse the chapter you're in for the story you're telling. Being fired wasn't my ending. It was page 1. If you're in a dark place right now, if someone just told you that you're not good enough, if you feel like everything you built just fell apart, I want you to hear this clearly.